Breaking news out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, where an ATR-72 has gone down today, Friday, the 9th of August. Here's what we know so far. Starting with the Aviation Safety Network, Friday, 9th of August, 13:22 local time, an ATR-72-212, Voepass Airlines, 62 fatalities, 62 occupants on board, aircraft destroyed near Vinhedo. A Voepass Airlines ATR-72-212A, better known as an ATR-72-500, performing flight as the local airline's flight number 2283, became uncontrollable and crashed near Vinhedo, Sao Paulo. All 58 passengers and 4 crew members perished and the aircraft was destroyed. Online videos showed the aircraft in a fully developed spin with little to no forward speed before it impacted a residential area and burst into flames. And there's multiple videos of this flat spin we'll take a look at in a moment. The flight had departed Cascavel Airport at 14:58 Universal Time, bound for Sao Paulo International Airport. The aircraft climbed to a cruising altitude of 17,000 feet, flight level 170, until ADS-B data showed the aircraft entering a sudden, sharp descent at 16:21 Universal Time, or Zulu Time. The weather at Campinas, just 14 kilometers away from the accident site, showed at 1600 Z, the winds 020 at 8 knots, Cav OK, clear weather. Temperature dew point spread of just 17 degrees Celsius temperature, 15 degrees on the dew point. And then at 1632 Z shows the winds 360 at 7, winds still out of the north, 4,000 in light rain and mist. Again, the temperature 17 degrees, dew point 15 degrees. If we look at Google Earth, we can see a line of weather, a large line of weather moving through the area at the time of the accident. Sao Paulo being located right here. And of course, it's below the equator, so it's winter time down there. Here on the Weather Channel, they're showing a bit of weather moving through the area, 65 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. If we look at the data on FlightAware, we can see the aircraft is cruising at a 17,000 foot altitude, and then the airspeed drops off and the aircraft begins a spin from about 16,000 feet. Total aircraft control is lost. Based on the solid line on the altitude, we can assume that the autopilot was on. There were variations in the speed of the aircraft in this data, and if we look at the more granulated data, we can see the ground speed in knots in this column here and ground speed in miles per hour in this column here, cruising along at 17,000 feet, IFR flight plan, and ground speed maintaining about 300 miles per hour ground speed, and then the ground speed slowing to 241 miles an hour or 209 knots at 16,000 feet, a slight descent from 17,000 feet to 16,000 feet, and then the airspeed just drops right off and the rate of descent just exceeds 11,000 feet per minute. The aircraft is in a spin from 16,000 feet. There are numerous videos of the final moments of this flight showing the aircraft clearly in a spin, a fairly flat spin, and if you listen to the audio, it sounds to me like both engines were running, and at some point here the crew did elect to pull the power back on the engines, it sounds like to me. The final flat spin as seen from another angle. And another angle here.
Gente, o avião caindo, gente, o avião caindo. O avião caindo. Caiu.
So apparently because the aircraft was spinning down from such a high altitude, plenty of people were able to capture the final moments on their cell phone. Here's yet another angle. Here's an angle that captured the spin from pretty early on.
Caralho, rapaziada, o avião caindo. Que porra é essa, viado?
Sounds like two engines.
Caralho.
And it sounds to me like there was a reduction in power towards the end of the spin. a photo of the actual accident airplane, the ATR. And as mentioned many times on this channel, if you get one of these multi-engine aircraft into a spin, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to recover the aircraft from the spin. There's simply too much mass with the two engines outside of the center of rotation of the aircraft to stop the rotation of the spin, plus the configuration of this tail and the angle of attack that tail is experiencing, specifically the rudder during the spin, gives them very little rudder authority to recover the aircraft from the spin. And the first step to any sort of a flat spin, of course, is you've got to reduce the power. The power is what's keeping the nose up on the horizon and making the spin flat. This photo comes to us via Jet Photos and is the photo on the Flight Radar 24 site. Investigators will be looking at the configuration of the aircraft at the time of the accident. Since it was still in cruise flight at 17 or 16,000 feet, it's more than likely that the flaps were up or retracted and the gear was also retracted. Accident investigators are going to be looking very closely at the weather in this situation, and specifically icing conditions. Initial reports do seem to indicate that there's the possibility that severe icing conditions did exist at the time of this accident. And these turboprop aircraft are particularly susceptible to airframe icing, primarily because of their mission. They are cruising at 17,000 feet, right in the icing conditions, especially in southern latitudes in the wintertime and warmer climates. Regular airliners, the larger airliners, we will cruise well above the freezing level, up 30 to nearly 40,000 feet above the clouds, above the freezing conditions, but the turboprops are stuck smack dab right in the middle of it. And here in the ATR icing manual, it tells you right away that flying in icing conditions is a serious threat. Operating in hot countries does not prevent one from encountering icing conditions. 30 degrees at sea level means that 0 degrees Celsius is at flight or at 15,000 feet, your standard adiabatic lapse rate. Due to prevailing atmospheric conditions at their operating flight levels, turboprop aircraft fly where icing conditions are most likely to occur. And one of the worst kind of icing conditions that pilots need to be concerned with in these areas and flying these kind of aircraft are large supercooled water droplets. The impact of flying in icing conditions in the ATR is similar to that of other aircraft. You lose lift, you increase your drag, you lose performance on the aircraft, and you alter the handling behavior of the aircraft. Now, the ATR, like all airliners, has anti-icing and de-icing systems on board the aircraft to handle normal icing conditions, but if you get into severe icing conditions, you are in an emergency situation. Because this is such a critical situation in the ATR, you are given a severe icing emergency checklist. It's a box checklist, which means this checklist needs to be memorized, and you need to quickly perform these tasks from memory. Minimum icing speed, increase by 10 knots. Power management, go to MCT or max continuous thrust. Condition lever, prop lever, 100% max continuous thrust. Autopilot, if engaged, firmly hold the control wheel and disengage. Remember the comment about handling? Icing conditions can get the aircraft severely out of trim. Severe icing conditions, escape. You've got to vacate that altitude before it's too late. ATC, notify. Let them know that you're in severe icing conditions. Don't wait for a clearance to leave the icing conditions. Just escape and get out of the icing conditions. And if we take the KML data into Google Earth, we can see that the aircraft lost control very quickly after a short descent from 17,000 feet to 16,000 feet, and the spin began. So these are some of the things that investigators will be looking at and what we know so far about the loss of the ATR aircraft in Sao Paulo, Brazil today. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.